We heard from one Democratic candidate for governor, and I'm excited to now introduce another. As I pull out the bio, here we go. This is my paper. Mark Connolly began his public service in 1977 when he served as a state rep from Bedford while attending Dartmouth College. He served as Assistant Secretary of State from 1980 to 84 before becoming Director of Securities Regulation and Deputy Secretary of State for New Hampshire. Mark is a leading advocate for mutual fund reform and has taken action against several national firms for inadequate disclosure and fraud. He's been cited by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Business Week, the Boston Globe for his regulatory efforts and market reform advocacy. In 2011, he published a book on failures and cover-ups in government regulation. And Mark has also walked with the New Hampshire Rebellion and been a strong advocate of this cause. Would you join me in welcoming Mark Connolly?
So, I was told to stand in the spotlight, so I looked over here, fight big money in politics, and also We the People Convention. So I was reminded something that it's apropos, I think, to today's meeting, that in Philadelphia in 1787, Benjamin Franklin, who at that point was near the end of his life, was being literally carried out of the convention hall, and a woman said to him, "Doctor, what have you given us today, a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic, madam, see if you can keep it." So I think those words are as telling today as they were back then. Now, I am a candidate for governor, and my candidacy really, the marker is education, innovation, and job creation. But I'm going to limit my comments today to what we're here today to talk about, which is big money in politics. So, as Dan mentioned, I served as securities director for the state for 8 years. And I will tell you that what I witnessed in the first decade of this century is unprecedented. Now, let me tell you what happened. We lost some $14 trillion in America. Jobs, homes, careers, and we're still suffering from that. And I want to put that into some historical context. If you go back in the history of this country, every 10 or 15 years, we have suffered some degree of financial crisis. But I will tell you, since 1980, that has accelerated, where now we have a financial crisis on average every 6 to 7 years. In the early 1980s, we had, you recall, the savings and loan crisis, where the federal government had to bail out these banks to the tune of some $160 billion. Then we had the financial crisis of 1987, where the stock market in one day went down some 22%. Then we had the Bank of Commerce in Washington that was laundering monies in the 1990s. Then we had long-term capital management that blew up in 1998, a hedge fund that almost brought the economy down at that point. And where do we go from there? In the first part of this century, we had 3 downturns in the 3 years down in the market. That didn't happen before since the Great Depression. We had Enron, the biggest Ponzi scheme in American history. We had Adelphia, WorldCom, HealthSouth, Tyco. Remember all those names? So then we passed something called Sarbanes-Oxley, and everybody thought, now we've taken care of our financial markets. But we didn't. Because what we didn't do is we didn't regulate derivatives. What we didn't do is that we didn't allow the mortgage market to be fair and equitable, and we had subprime mortgages, we had securitization of mortgages that didn't require banks to keep any of that on their balance sheets. And the reason that happened was because the Federal Reserve did not take action, and the Congress was lobbied not to do anything. What happened? In 2008 and 9, we saw a financial crisis that literally almost bankrupted the world economy. In 2009, the International Monetary Fund published a paper, and it was called A Fistful of Dollars. And their conclusion was that the reason this is happening and the reason the financial markets in the world are being roiled is because of the way we do politics in this country, the amount of lobbyists and special interests that are controlling our democracy today. Now, here's the frightening part. We saw what the Federal Reserve did in 2008 and 9. Our balance sheet today can't handle another financial crisis. What will cause that financial crisis? Well, let me tell you something. As a financial person, we really don't have much inflation in our economy today. Where the inflation is the special interests in Washington and the money that's going into our politics. Let me give you some historical context. In 1998, it cost about less than $1 million to run for Congress, and probably about $5 million to run for the United States Senate. That's double today. And the senators and congressmen who leave, half of those people become lobbyists. The money in Washington is out of control. We spend some $3 billion in lobbying, and one-third of that goes to financial services. So we have congressmen and senators becoming lobbyists. We have special interests. The inflation of that is getting bigger, and their money is going into our political system. Now, is there any doubt in your minds what that means? In the context of what I'm trying to say is, if we do not rein this in, what we have experienced for the last 40 years will continue. And my suggestion is we don't have the benefit of what we did in 2009. Now, I also want to tell you, as a candidate for governor, that these problems very much exist in our state too, at a much lower level. The Center for Public Integrity ranked New Hampshire with a D. Why? One of the worst in the country. Because we have inadequate transparency, we don't have sufficient disclosure, we have lobbyists who bundle money for candidates. I can tell you, as a candidate for governor, corporations can give unlimited amount of money to candidates for governor or statewide office. That's not right. Should lobbyists be able to take money from their clients and bundle it and give it to candidates and we don't know about it? Does that make sense to any of us? Now, I can tell you, when I was in the legislature back in the 70s, there were just a handful of lobbyists. Today, there are more lobbyists than there are legislators in Concord, and they're spending some $12 million a year on things like the pipeline, Northern Pass, all the things that affect our economy. Very much similar to what's going on in Washington. Now, our government, in my opinion, in Washington and Concord doesn't represent us. It's very much attuned to what's going on nationally. And we need to be aware that our government, even in New Hampshire, is under attack and under control, and we have to address it. Now, we're talking about Citizens United. We have to, that's the big stuff, and that's where we're going. Our legislature, though, has not yet told Washington that we want a constitutional amendment to say that we got to get the money out, that we have to address what the Supreme Court did in 2010 in Citizens United. We have to do that. We have to be one of those states that says no, not in New Hampshire, not in America. What we need to do is say anybody who is a lobbyist, we have to expand that definition. So what does that mean today? A person who's a legislator, they can leave Congress, and there's this cooling off period, right? 1 or 2 years. 1 for Congress, 2 for Senate. Let's make it 5 years. And let's say that you can't be a special advisor, getting away the lobbying definition. You cannot be a lobbyist on any level. You can't use your job as a politician to benefit yourself. Lobbyists, they cannot give money to people who serve on committees. If you're on the Commerce Committee in Washington, even in Concord, by the way, you should not be taking money from entities that you directly influence. That needs to stop. Disclosure. Any money that's given to any candidate, a certain dollar or higher, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, needs to be disclosed. We all know now that some $6 billion was spent in 2012 in our last presidential election. Who knows what it's going to be this year? Do you realize that probably a third of that was dark money, these so-called super PACs? And that money exists in our state too. We know now that money is coming into our state, and we don't know who's giving it. Now, the legislature did pass a law that said they have to disclose where it's going in our state. But the Koch brothers, they're saying, you know what, I don't think we're going to do that either. We're not going to do it. We're not going to disclose even the money coming in or where it's being spent. And what is our state doing about it? Not much, nothing. We don't have the resources to challenge that. That, it has to stop. We have to say New Hampshire is not for sale. In order to make our democracy real and to do what Benjamin Franklin said, we have to control the money and where it's going. It is true. It is relevant. It is real that our individual lives are being affected by the special interests and lobbyists. And that's the context I try to give you today, where because the money is getting bigger and more pronounced, our very life, our very economy is being threatened. And if we don't get this under control, it's not a question of if, it's when the next financial crisis will happen. We need to take our democracy back. Now, I'll end it there, but if anybody has any questions about what I've talked about or any questions about me running for governor, happy to answer your questions.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to be here. With so many groups all hammering the same message, I've had a question for a lot of people I'm just not smart enough to figure out for myself. Why don't we put more emphasis on the idea of a referendum ballot? Why don't we have publicly funded state universities in every state do the research to determine the exact legal applicability on the state level and constitutionally, so that when we say something like we want 50% of the Department of Defense budget back for this country and get more than 50% of every person in every state to say that? Why can't we do that? Why don't we put more, why is there not more of an initiative on a referendum ballot?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, but there are many states historically that do public policy by referendum. California is a good example of that. In our state, we do that by constitutional amendment. And unfortunately, it takes 2/3 of the legislature to put that on the ballot for the people to consider. But we do have a referendum in the sense of constitutional amendments, but it's much more difficult. Historically, that's not what we've done as a state. Obviously, given my talk today, I believe we should make government more transparent and open as much as possible and accessible. As far as education, you know, that's a part of my campaign where I think we are a great state, healthy state, great place to raise kids. But our economy in the last year and a half has been improving, but the real challenge before us is our demographics. 1/3 of our state will be 65 in the next 5 years. We have one of the highest outward migration rates of young people in the country. You can't build an economy on that. We have to do a better job to making education, community college, high school graduates, they have to be getting the tools and the education for this century, and we're not doing as good a job as we need to. And I can talk to you individually about that if you'd like.
And another question, quick question.
Yeah. Mark, we had our own scandal relative to investments in New Hampshire, and I don't remember what it was called, but this was the case that ostensibly the information was transferred to our then Attorney General Kelly Ayotte. And I wondered if you can talk a little bit about that case where there was a lot of fraud in New Hampshire. A lot of people lost some money.
And you could give us at least an hour on this if you'd give a brief answer, and I want to take one more question before we close.
This is a softball question, actually. When I was head of Director of Securities Regulation, I resigned in protest because I felt that our state government was not addressing what is called Financial Resources Mortgage Company. Financial Resources Mortgage Company is the largest Ponzi scheme in our state's history. The second largest Ponzi scheme happened a year before that. 2008, Noble Trust here in Manchester. 2009, FRM. Why did it happen? Big money in politics, meaning the people who were appointed to do their job, Kelly Ayotte being one of them, and I say in a book I wrote about this called Cover Up, in my opinion, the Attorney General's office is the entity that is most responsible for FRM. Why? Regulatory inertia, not doing their job, and very importantly, not representing what I believe is the best interest of our state. I have called in my campaign for a publicly elected Attorney General. We need to make our government as accessible as possible. And I can get into all the kind of details about FRM, but my conclusion is this. It shouldn't have happened. Enron shouldn't have happened. And the reason it happened was because there wasn't sufficient regulation to address it. And here's the scary part. $55 million was lost in these two Ponzi schemes, affected hundreds of people, like Bernie Madoff, suicides, people now on welfare, their lifetime savings. It happened here in our state. And it happened because we didn't do our job as a state government. And here's the real scary part. Nothing has changed since 2008 and 9 to make sure these Ponzi schemes don't happen in our state again. And if we're going to have good business development and we're going to be the kind of state where we want to be, our retirees have to believe their money is safe. And I believe we should do a better job in our state and nation to do that.
Mark, I just wanted to, Gordon Allen from the Open Democracy.
Hey, Gordon.
I just wanted to ask the same question I asked Colin, which is the casino gambling, the big money in casino gambling. I bet you there's been more money spent in the state of New Hampshire to pass casino gambling than probably any other big money operation. And Sheldon Adelson is probably the poster person for what's wrong with big money in our world. What is your position on casino gambling in New Hampshire?
And can we bundle one last question with that, Mark, if you don't mind?
This might go along well with it, Mark. Another way that big money gets into our system is through taking services which are currently delivered in the public sector and putting them in the private sector. And that would include corrections, juvenile corrections, water, education. Once we go that route, the corporations that make money from it have a tremendous incentive to continue to buy policies that benefit them. So I would love to know what you feel about privatization.
Okay, in the context of what I'm saying today is one of the reasons why we've had the problems we've had in our economy is because of the way we've deregulated industries. Now, we had a deregulation spurt in the 1970s, railroads, airlines, et cetera. I think there was some good in that, but not good in financial regulation. So I don't agree. I believe that there are certain elements of government that should stay in the public sector. We should not be privatizing the Veterans Administration. We should not be privatizing our prison system. That is a public good. The benefit in terms of why we have these institutions, if you think about the profit motivation, what happens when you do that is then it becomes to cut costs and it actually exacerbates the problem. Because if you're cutting costs and not providing programs to, in a sense, addressing why people are in prison, what do you think happens when they get out? So I don't agree with that. As far as casino gambling, I actually thought Colin gave a good answer on that. It's very much what I believe. It may have made sense to it may have made sense to look at this a competitive question 15 years ago. It doesn't make sense now. We have some 11 casinos in New England, more being built right across our border. I don't think it makes sense for our state to go in that direction, so I don't support casino gambling.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. We have a water bottle for you too, New Hampshire Rebellion. Okay. And I know you've walked with us before, so thank you so much.